Welcome. Welcome and happy Sunday. My name is Violet Esipila. I am a communications committee member, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Today we are featuring a special guest, Cory Bullock. Here, on behalf of the BPIA Communications Committee, the Communications Committee supports BPIA, social media, podcast, and more. This event is in the conclusion program for this year's committee, and the committee will resume in mid-January. And for more information, you can email us at communications@iabpia.org. With that, I will now introduce our guest speaker, Cory Bullock. Cory Bullock is a multilingual policy specialist with experience working at the intersection between conflict, human rights, and humanitarian assistance. In 2017, Cory began his professional journey at USAID as a senior information officer. He also served as a humanitarian policy advisor supporting USG, interagency engagement with NSC and State Department. In March 2020, Cory served as the chief speechwriter and special advisor to then acting USAID Administrators, John Barsa and Gloria Steele. And later as advisor to USAID Administrator, Samantha Powers. He now serves as a Congressional Advisor with USAID, advising on legislative outreach strategies and coordinating legislative activities in support of the Biden-Harris administration's foreign assistance policy priorities. Cory is a BPIA member and former BPIA board member and security fellow with Truman National Security Project. He is the president of the Harry T. Moore chapter of Blacks in Government. He is a graduate of Emory University and John Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. So with that being said, welcome Cory today, and thank you for this opportunity. I'll go ahead and start with one question. Could you tell us about your professional journey and what got you where you are today?
Thank you, Violet, and thank you to BPIA. Before I start answering the question, I'll just say, a couple of things. First, thanks for having me. And as Violet mentioned, I served on the board of BPIA for several years, and so I'm excited to see the organization grow and continue to grow. Under Alexandra's leadership as president. I know she'll take it to higher heights. And so it's just good to see the growth and excitement of the organization. And then also before I get started, I'll put out the typical disclosure. Although I'll be talking about my USAID experience, I'm speaking on on my personal behalf, and any statements I make are not attributed to USAID or the US government. So to answer the question, I have actually a very non-linear, non-traditional career path, especially compared to your average national security or international development professional. The short story is, I grew up wanting to be a lawyer, actually started my career on Wall Street and ended up in international development. The longer story is, I'll try to keep it short, but, I grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and knew I wanted to, do something, have a professional career. But growing up, it was, either you're going to be a lawyer or a doctor. And I knew I hated science and had no interest in medicine. So the doctor, that was out. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll be a lawyer. But I also knew I wanted to do something international. I wanted to work overseas, So I decided I was going to be an international lawyer, not even knowing what that was. And so I went to college. I went to Emory University in Atlanta as a pre-law student, but studied international relations. And again, thought I was going to take the traditional kind of law school route. But in my junior year of college, a couple of friends of mine were like, you need to try investment banking. Like, it's sexy, you're gonna make all this money. And again, I had no idea what it was, but I was like, okay, I want to make some money and, have a career. So I applied for an internship with Citigroup and got it, and justified it by, they're a big international company that had offices all over the world. And yes, it did an investment banking internship on Wall Street, opened up a whole new world for me. But I realized that I didn't really want to be a part of that world. I still wanted to do something like help people that work with like disadvantaged communities. And so, but I did stay. After the internship, I got a full-time job, and I stayed on Wall Street for a little longer than I should have. I got caught up in the money and the lifestyle and all that. But eventually, I decided this is not really what I want to do. It's not for me. I knew I wanted to work in developing countries, and I thought I could take, the skill set and background that I had in financial services and apply that to developing countries. And in my mind, that meant working for the World Bank. Because again, at that time, I was still new to the industry, but that was my goal. I was like, I'm going to move to DC, work for the World Bank. And I was like, well, I think a master's degree is going to help me pivot and get there. So I applied to a couple of schools in DC, and I ended up going to Johns Hopkins SAIS. I studied African development. And even before I went to SAIS, I wanted to do something to like just get a little taste. And so I took a couple months and volunteered in Tanzania as a teacher in a primary school to get that development experience firsthand and be on the ground and see with my own eyes. And so so I ended up going to SAIS, studied African development. But then after SAIS, I was like, okay, now I have my degree in development. I have my kind of finance background. How can I merge the two to, start my career in development? And so I ended up working for Microvest Capital Management, which is an impact investing fund that invests in microfinance institutions. And I was like, this is perfect, right? It's finance, it's development, but it still wasn't like, I didn't get the fulfillment that I wanted. I wasn't really helping kind of the poorest of the poor. And then interestingly, so this is about October 2016, Hurricane Matthew hit Haiti. And I was fired up. I was like, okay, we got to do something. I had some friends from grad school, some were Haitian American. We were like, okay, let's get together. Let's raise some money. Let's go out there and let's go help. And then I learned, why that's not the best idea, but, at least the passion was there, the interest was there. And that led me to apply to a job at USAID. And I started out working in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Been with the agency for 5 years now, working in a couple of different capacities, including as a speechwriter, which I know you all are interested in hearing more about. And yeah, that's how that's how I got to where I am today.
Wow. You definitely have quite an extensive experience. Thank you. And the second question would be, what does it take to be a good speechwriter? For someone who wants to become one, what skills do you recommend they develop?
Yeah, I'll say so. Speech writing is a very dynamic and very, challenging position, career path. There are a lot of different skills and qualities that I think are important, but I'll touch on a couple. I think the first and most important thing is you have to be willing to take yourself out of the equation and think how your principal thinks, speak how your principal, or at least write how your principal speaks. This is not a career for those who are very proud and want recognition, because you'll be spending a lot of time writing for other people, and while they deliver the speeches and get all the recognition, you're kind of behind the scenes. So you have to be comfortable with that. But you also have to kind of just change your mindset a little bit, right? Like when you think about a situation, your first question can't be like, how would I say this? How would I think about this? It has to be, how would my principal think about this? Like, what would they say about this? And so you really need to, again, like be comfortable working in the background and uplifting someone else. And that takes, learning your principal's voice, learning how they speak, how they think, either through, researching things that they've said before or written before, or spending as much time as you can in meetings with them one-on-one, just to kind of understand the thought process. And again, how they view the world, how they view, the issues that you're working on. And that can be tricky. I'll say I've served as a speechwriter to 3 different administrators. 2 of them are women. And I've had to really change, my mindset and how, and like really understand gender dynamics, especially at that level. And that means like certain words that I was told to not use words that are too emotive, that are too gendered, like to make sure that, because again, as a woman at that level, you want to be seen as serious. And so those things I had to think through. Obviously, in my everyday life, I don't think about that, but that was just interesting as I was writing for senior women leaders. I think another thing is, if you want to write well, you have to read a lot. And I would say read fiction, read poetry. I actually like reading biographies and like nonfiction, but I think if you want to be a successful speechwriter, you have to really read other types of genres to, just understand how things like character development is portrayed, to understand like wordplay, because in speechwriting, it's a different type of writing, right? Like the normal rules of grammar don't really apply. Like you can start a sentence with a conjunction. You can you can write a couple of sentence fragments. Like it doesn't have to be like AP style writing. You have to be comfortable with puns and wordplay. And again, I think by reading other types of genres, I think that will help kind of center your mind around creative writing, I would say. I think another thing to think about is, if you want to be a good speechwriter, you have to think about the audience. That's the most important aspect. What is a goal? What does the audience want to hear? What is the goal to convince someone to change their mind on a policy issue? Is it to raise money? Is it to, you have to just think through that. And like every sentence that you write, every word that you write has to meet or advance that one goal. So you have to be goal oriented and really kind of strategic in how you write. And I'll say the last thing is, there's so many other things, but you have to be flexible and adaptable. It's a very challenging, like long hours type of profession. Like you'll be making edits to drafts overnight, sometimes minutes before the speech is happening. Your whole thesis might change because of real life events that we can't control, or maybe what you thought the purpose was going to be changed, or like the hypothesis you had isn't accurate. Like there's so many things that can change the direction. And so you just have to be flexible, be willing to start from scratch if need be. And, you have to think on your feet, because sometimes you'll be asked again, like minutes before, to like change a sentence or change a paragraph, and you just got to be able to like jump in and do it. So those are some of the qualities I think that make a good speechwriter.
And do you have any, can you provide us with any other advice?
Advice, I think, obviously, if you want to be a good writer, you just have to start writing, like just write and write a lot, write in your personal, like if you want to write a journal, or if you just have like just write. Because again, I think sometimes, you know, you're asked to write up a short statement in like a half hour. So you just have to be comfortable like having that like process from like brain to paper. It has to be second nature, it has to be automatic. So if you're comfortable doing that, the only way you get comfortable doing that is just to continue writing, practicing, get your name out there. You know, there's so many ways, you know, if you can be published in like a, you know, article, I mean, in a journal or magazine, that's useful. But, you know, there's Medium, there's your own social media page, there's blog, like there's so many ways to get your voice out there, and to establish your reputation as a writer, because then people will look to you and be like, oh, I know he or she writes, and so this opportunity, you know, and you can be tapped for those.
Yeah, these are really great points, and I definitely agree with just starting small, or you know, starting a blog and people seeing what, you know, how your writing samples are. I definitely agree. So now I'll go ahead and open up a Q&A. If anyone has any questions, they can just raise their hand and I'll select, or you can write on the chat and I will read the questions for you, or you can private message me. But I do see one question on the chat already from Sonia. How did you jump into speech writing from your finance experiences, and how did you break in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I realized I didn't really talk about how I got into speech writing, but honestly, like I fell into it. I never saw myself as being a speechwriter. So when I first joined USAID, the job I had was very writing intensive. I was like writing reports, I was writing briefing papers. A large part of my job was writing, and that's how I said, you know, before, like establish a reputation as a writer. That's kind of how I established my reputation within USAID as a writer. And so honestly, a friend of mine who was a speechwriter reached out to me and was like, hey, you know, we're looking to expand a team. Would you be interested? And he reached out to me because he knew that, you know, I had a reputation as a writer and he knew my work. And so I was like, at first, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to do it because again, I didn't see myself being a speechwriter, but I was like, you know, let me just take this opportunity to challenge myself, learn a different skill set, and really get, you know, access and exposure to leadership at the highest levels within the agency. So that's how I got into speech writing. It was basically an opportunity kind of landed in my lap, but that was because, you know, again, some of the relationships that I've built and, you know, people who were familiar with my work.
And I have one person raised their hand. Destiny, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. I did have a question. When you first started, well, obviously you talked about your job being pretty demanding with writing, but how was your confidence with writing? Like, did you feel like you were a strong writer? Did you feel like you were kind of just doing what was asked of you and you continue to, I guess, work on the skills that were necessary? But I guess I'm asking, like, what was your attitude towards writing?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I wasn't too confident, especially because I had never done speech writing before. Again, the type of writing I was doing was like very kind of like policy focused and like very dry. And again, speech writing is a whole different type of writing. Like you really need to communicate. We always say like, you know, how your grandmother communicates. Like you have to explain something as if you're explaining it to your grandmother. And, you know, working at a agency like USAID and other government agencies, everyone's like very technical, and you know, we within the agency know certain terms, but you're talking to the public, you might have to use different language. So I wasn't particularly confident, especially my speech writing abilities, but I was like, you know what, like I'm gonna, obviously this person had faith in me to even like reach out to me, so I'm just gonna do the best I can, and I know I was going to learn along the way. And I think because speech writing is a very niche industry skill set, like you're not going to find many people, unless someone who worked for like West Wing writers, but like, again, that's like that's not that many people. Most people don't come into it like having speech writing experience. So it's really a learn on a job type of job. But again, over time, my confidence, I gained confidence. I would get feedback, both positive and negative, but you learn from the negative feedback. And as I grew into the role, my confidence increased. But again, there's always challenge. There's always like I still don't feel like today that I'm like the best speechwriter. There's always things to learn. There's always different types of principles. And so there's always ways to challenge yourself and grow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and I have one question here. What are from Jael Lewis, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly? What are your thoughts on LinkedIn as a platform for executive messaging?
Yeah, no, I think LinkedIn is a major platform that you should take advantage of, especially because the whole purpose of LinkedIn is to conduct outreach with the professional networks. I know a lot. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn a lot, just like scrolling through, seeing what people are saying. So I think it's definitely a tool that you should use to get your message out there. Obviously, I don't know if LinkedIn has a like character limit, but you also don't want to. You want to keep your messages like short and to the point, because you get a lot of people who are like, TLDR, I'm not going to read this whole thing. But I think, LinkedIn is good for like something that's a little bit like, obviously Twitter has a very short, very low character count, but you can probably flesh ideas out a little bit more on LinkedIn. So definitely take advantage of that.
Mm. And another question, a private message is, how do you get back into writing professional after a prolonged period of not doing so? Would you still approach as the just right method, or would it be require a different strategy?
No, I would suggest that because even if you don't write in your professional job, you can write in your personal capacity, right? Like you can, again, I started a Medium page because it's just so easy, right? So I would just pick a couple of topics that you're passionate about, that you're interested in, that you think you provide a unique voice. I will just say off the bat, everyone in BPIA provides a unique voice to all the issues that we work on, because we are underrepresented in this field. So if you need a motivating factor, like just take that one off the bat. Just write and also do a little bit of self-promotion. Put a link to your page on your social media to drive traffic, and have people share your posts so that you can get your name out there.
Okay. And another question from Hope Williams. How do you balance using your own voice in your personal comms platforms in order to not cause any negative impact or perceptions from agency leadership or prospective leaders? What is your recommendation or recommended approach?
Well, first I'll say hi, Hope. She serves on the board of USAID's Harry Timor chapter of Blacks in Government. No, it is a challenge. I think you really have to kind of just like separate, put a kind of like just a wall in your mind, and have your personal platform, and like the things you write about, the things you say, should be completely separate and different, and from your professional capacity. And if you are in this job as a speechwriter and you work for like a high level principal, you also just might have to censor yourself a little bit, because, you don't want to be seen as saying anything that's either out of line with leadership's views, or you just make it very, very clear that you are serving, writing and speaking in your personal capacity, and to not attribute, what you say back to your professional entity. It's a very fine line. I think the more you're in this job, or the more you're kind of in these spaces, you kind of get a feel for what to say, what not to say, what's going to cause issues, what's not going to cause issues. But I would just say be cautious to start. I think, yeah, I think you use your gut, right? Like, if this tweet gets out, if this whatever gets out, or if your leadership, saw that you wrote that there could be some repercussions. And I think that's just one of the, I would say, disadvantages of working, at least at a government agency. If you work for, or even any agency, but I think it's more strict within government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Being cautious. I have Destiny. You can go ahead and answer your question.
Thank you. Do you have any rituals or like a strategy that you use at the beginning of your speech writing? Is there a format that you kind of follow, or does it look different, with every speech that you write? I just wanted to know.
Yeah, I had, I guess kind of informally, I never like wrote it down on paper, but I guess just doing it over and over again, I realized it was like an approach that I took. So I would say, within USAID, the way things work, especially when you want the administrator to speak, is, either they'll get invited from a third party like organization directly, and they'll send either a concept note or a flyer or an invitation laying out like, what the event is, what the purpose is, or someone from within the building will say, hey, we want the administrator to speak at this event, and they'll do the same thing, right? Like they'll write out like what the event is, what the purpose is, who the audience is. And so once I have that, I just kind of take a step back and say, okay, like, what is the purpose of the event? Who's the audience? What is our goal here? Kind of what I mentioned earlier. And I kind of just jot that down. And then you get a feel for like, is this a 5-minute speech? Is this a 10-minute speech? Is this a 2-minute like toast? So that kind of the time frame that you're working with. And once you have all that down, I do an outline, right? So I do like intro, and typically in speech writing, like the intro is always like, thank you for inviting me. And you do a couple of shout outs to the event organizers. So you like get that out the way. And it depends, different principles, like different techniques, like some like to start out with a story. And so again, I like, include that in my outline, like we need to get a story. And then, think about the body of the speech, like what are the main points, what's the thesis, and what are the points that we're going to use to support that, and then the conclusion. So it's like any other type of writing, like you have an outline, you figure out like what your goal is and what you're trying to achieve, and then you start to do the research to pull in the supporting points, right? And within an agency like USAID, I'll reach out to people who are experts in this field, right? If it's about girls' education, I'll talk to the team that does programming in girls' education. And a lot of times I'm also just looking at what either the principal or other principals have said about the topic, so I know what's in, and what people are saying about it. So it does take a lot of research on your own, both like kind of like firsthand with subject matter experts, but then also through the internet, looking at research reports, other things, just again scanning to kind of pull out main ideas, and looking at like pithy ways to say things. But yeah, so that's kind of my process and outline.
One follow-up. At what point do you include the person you're writing the speech for? Is it kind of like, hey, I had this idea, you know, you run it by them, or is it kind of when you've wrapped up and then you go back and do edits? What point do you speak with that?
Yeah, no, that's also a good question. Again, different principals have different processes. Well, I think an ideal way to do it is like once you know that a speech is on the calendar, you have a meeting with the principal and do exactly what you said. You know, I would start with an outline. Again, as I'm talking through it, it depends. When you're first meeting with the principal, and you don't know how they're going to approach it, it might make sense, but even before you start your outline and your research, because you don't want to do a lot of work that's going to have to be redone, to just talk it through and be like, how would you approach this? Like, what do you want to say about this? And then over time, you'll learn, like, you may not need to have that intro meeting anymore because you already know what they're going to say. They may have spoken on this before, but I would say, like, as you're getting to know your principal, it needs, like, in the beginning, sit down together, and it could be 5 minutes, right? Because a lot of times they don't have a ton of time. They're doing 50 other things. So that's also why you need to be kind of quick, be able to take down notes and, like, you know, remember what you discussed. But yeah, early on, present the idea, like, this is where you're speaking, this is who the audience is, and get their views right away. Like, what do you want to say? How would you say it? Have you, like, you know, have you been to this country before? Like, if it's about, you know, something in India, like, because weaving in personal stories and personal anecdotes always, like, builds that connection with the audience. Yeah, so early on, once you get that, then you know, you have your homework to do. You reach out to whoever you need to reach out to, put a draft together. Again, ideally, you would be like trading drafts back and forth, but in the real world, that doesn't really work. So a lot of times what ends up happening is, you know, the day before, 2 days before, you'll send a draft, and, you know, they'll say, okay, this looks good. And they may even just, like, take it and just read it, or more often than not, they'll make line edits or be like, oh, I don't understand this doesn't make sense. And then that's where that mad dash is, like the 24 hours before the actual speech is, like, you're going back and forth, making edits, trying to get new stories, new data. But yeah.
All right, thank you for that. I have another private question here from, can you speak about your language skills? Which languages do you speak, and when did you learn them along your journey? How has being multilingual benefited you in your career?
Well, I think the last question is, you know, obviously working in international development, you're traveling, you're speaking to people in different countries, you just having different language skills allow you to build connections. But I started learning different languages when I was in 5th grade. My school had a Spanish class. And I just took to it easily. I don't know what it is. My parents only speak English. I never, you know, I grew up in Bed-Stuy. I didn't have a lot of exposure to different languages, but for some reason, I just had a facility with learning Spanish. I just, like, picked it up easily. And after that, I was like, okay, I want to kind of, you know, move on to a different language and challenge myself. So I started learning French. And then I took French in high school. And then again, just like throughout college and grad school, I just kept adding languages to it. So I would say, you know, everyone always asks, like, you know, how many languages are you speaking? And are you fluent? And that's always a tough question to answer. But I say I feel most confident, like, speaking Spanish, French, Arabic. I lived in Germany, so I speak a little bit of German. I studied Mandarin in grad school, so I can have a basic conversation in Mandarin. And honestly, like, most countries I go to, I try to learn at least the basics to be able to, like, speak to people in cabs, order food at restaurants. I studied Arabic, and I served in Jordan with USAID at the mission there, so I speak Arabic as well. So yeah, those are the main languages that I'm most comfortable with.
Okay. Thank you for that. I have another question from Alexandra. Have you had to write or speak on policy position you do not agree with? Is it appropriate to vocalize that to a principal? What's your strategy for writing responses after crisis?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I definitely have had to write about, policy positions that I didn't always agree with. And, I think it depends. You have to do kind of an assessment within yourself, like how important is this to me? Do you think you can move the needle a little bit? Obviously everything is a trade-off. You have to, figure out, is this going to do damage to the relationship? So those are the kind of questions you think about when you try to decide whether it's appropriate to vocalize. I think if you have a very close relationship with the principal, which is ideal, and again, as you work more closely together and be able to sit in on meetings and really understand that person, you might feel more comfortable saying, I don't agree with this. But sometimes it might be like, okay, noted. And I know your disagreement, but we're going to move forward. And then, that's that. Now, if that's a red line for you, then you need to think about, the position you're in and whether it makes sense for you morally to continue serving in that role. I served under Acting Administrator John Barsa in the last administration, and during the time of George Floyd's murder, and a lot of, obviously that sparked outrage from within government, corporations, everyone obviously was speaking out about it, and there was some hesitancy. The viewpoint was like this was a domestic issue. It doesn't have much to do with USAID, but I was able to kind of make an argument of why it expanded beyond just US politics, how this had impact on how the world views us, how we're viewed as an agency. And I felt comfortable enough to have that discussion and to voice my opinion there. So again, you have to figure out how important the issue is. And again, kind of those questions I talked about in the beginning, to ask yourself if it's worth pursuing. Writing a response after a crisis, obviously that's a lot of what USAID does. We respond to humanitarian crises. Things happen, you got to be quick. So I think that's just it. You just got to be quick. A lot of times you're not going to know a lot, because especially in the first couple of hours after something big happens, like a Haiti earthquake or an attack in some country. But you just need to figure out what you do know, what you can say. A lot of times people just want to know that either USAID or some other agency is tracking this and is paying attention to it, and that they're part of the conversation. So sometimes, even if it's just a short statement, maybe it's a tweet to start until you get more information. So I just think being quick and understanding what you can and cannot say with confidence at that point is probably the first thing I would do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If we don't have any other questions, I will go ahead and ask the final question. Since you have experiences in living abroad, has that have some part in influencing you as a speechwriter, knowing that just learning about other cultures, and how has that influenced your
career? No, I think that definitely has influenced my, writing here at USAID. I think just by the nature of what we do, it's important because a lot of times, especially in a virtual environment, but even, not just virtually, because now people are traveling, but a lot of times you're giving speeches overseas. And you need to be, culturally sensitive. You don't want to, say something that is going to offend people. And so, just having an understanding of how, things people say in different countries or how people live in, like just having that understanding just always helps. Obviously, there are like other advisors and experts, like, people who live in the country who can provide some of that advice too. But if you yourself can also help like reinforce that message, and you can make edits yourself to the speech that are culturally sensitive and culturally appropriate. That just adds value to the principal, and it demonstrates what you can, what support and what type of value you can add to the job.
Okay. And I see some members joined us a bit late. I just want to give them the opportunity to ask any questions to our guest speaker, Cory Bullock.
Well, while people, get their thoughts together, if they want to ask more questions, I want to say there are aspects to the speech writing job that don't have to do much with writing. So obviously, like, your day-to-day is focused on like writing drafts and remarks and, messages, but there's a lot that I actually enjoyed about the job that have nothing to do with writing. And that's like the relationship building. Again, like I mentioned, like, depending on the topic, like you're going to be working with experts in different policy matters. I really got to learn and meet people throughout the building, just by like working on speeches for the administrator. There's also a lot of like diplomacy and negotiation, and either like, edits going back and forth. Like sometimes, again, people that you're working with who are the experts are like, oh, I don't like this. And it's like, okay, I understand you don't like that, but that's how the principal wants to say it. If this isn't changing the accuracy of the statement, then like, let's talk about it. But if it's just like your personal preference, then, again, noted, but this is how, we're gonna say this. So it takes a little bit of tact, and especially when you're working with like senior level people within the agency, because everyone thinks that their edit is important. And so you really have to kind of like do a little bit of a dance there to meet people's needs and making sure that, everyone's voice feels heard. And again, like just being able to, you really have to become an expert in a lot of things in a couple of days, right? Because of what we do at USAID is so broad. It could be, a humanitarian crisis in Syria, or it could be like, girls' education in Bangladesh, or it could be COVID-19, global health. Like there's just so many things that we work on. And so you really have to be like a generalist and be able to like absorb information fast, and sound like an expert, at least in that one speech that you're writing. But through that, you learn a lot. You get to meet a lot of people. Again, by sitting in meetings, you kind of just learn through osmosis. And so you really kind of just build up your knowledge base about the field you're in or the topic you're working on.
I do have another question here on the chat. Are you currently writing for multiple seniors, or are you assigned to a sole officials? And does it require you to travel with them on a regular basis?
So I've left the speech writing role a couple months ago. So I'm not doing speech writing anymore. I'm now working in our Office of Legislative Affairs. But when I was writing, so I was writing for the acting administrator, John Barsa, and then the deputy administrator, Bonnie Glitz. So I was serving two principals. But then a lot of times there are other senior principals within the front office who would need support. And so that was always a challenge, right? Trying to juggle different principals who have different speaking styles, have different working styles. And again, when I was doing this is during COVID, so there wasn't a lot of travel. But now that, travel is opening up again, I know the speechwriters who are working right now in the front office do get to travel sometimes. So but yeah, unfortunately, I was doing this during COVID, so I didn't get the opportunity to travel too much.
Okay. Thank you, Cory, for all the wonderful tips, you know, and just providing us with your knowledge, your expertise in your profession. With that being said, you know, I would like to, if you have any last minute remarks, we'll appreciate it.
No, I mean, you know, thank you for the opportunity just to speak with you all, tell you a little bit about my experience. I think, again, you know, some of the things I mentioned before, like if you are, you know, if it's just exciting to you to learn about a bunch of different things, you know, to be working on drafts and edits, you know, last minute, like, I mean, people like that. Some people thrive in that type of environment where it's just like always a rush. And that's part of, you know, why I like the job as well. But if those things, you know, excite you, then I would definitely, you know, look into, you know, opportunities to write. I'll put in a plug. There's a new organization called Speechwriters of Color, that are, you know, doing similar things to what BPIA is doing, expanding opportunities and access for people of color looking into the speech writing field. So I would take a look at them to, you know, either join their LinkedIn page and get on a mailing list, because they often put out opportunities for people who are interested. So yeah, if what I said sounds good, then again, put your name out there, start writing, and you know, we'll see how opportunities arise. Okay.
And can we contact you if in case, can the audiences contact you through your LinkedIn or any other avenue of contact if they have any other questions?
Yeah, and I would suggest, yeah, reach out on LinkedIn. I think you should be able to find me easily. I don't think there are too many Cory Bullocks out there, but yeah, I would say reach out on LinkedIn if you have any other questions or want to connect more.
Okay. Okay, and we also have your LinkedIn here on the chat for anyone that wants to follow you. With that being said, I'll go ahead and thank everyone. I would like to really thank everyone, or the guests here today on Sunday, for coming and just sharing, for coming and listening to Cory Bullock to share his experiences with us. And and again, if you have any questions, please reach out to us at communications@aibpia.org. And we'll be able to further assist you.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.